All right, welcome to Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast, and I'm the host for today, Betsy Cunningham, and John, Zach, Dane. You want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah. I'm John Hunter with Community Rights Douglas County and the Oregon Community Rights Network.
I'm Jack Whitworth. I'm a PhD student in history at the University of Oregon. I'm also affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology. Always happy to be here.
Dean Zener, he, him, concerned community member, involved in multiple different things, and always happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming. So this is kind of a roundtable, which usually means we didn't come up with a topic and find a special guest to come and talk about it. Um, so we were talking before we started recording about the growing concern people have about data centers. So, Zach, you're the one that kind of brought that up. You want to start that discussion?
Sure. Well, it's certainly a topic that's been on a lot of minds as of late. And more than that, it is an active issue that is the stage of many battles across the country at the moment. I've been hearing stories as far east as even Wisconsin in the last few days, small towns that are struggling to fight off tech companies that are trying to build data centers in the vicinity of a municipality or a county. And the among the environmental um, crises that these pose in terms of water use and pollution, in terms of electrical energy use, the costs of that are placed upon people in the surrounding area in the form of utility price hikes, or the building of new electrical generation facilities. John, before our recording started, mentioned the plans by a number of tech companies like Amazon to build their own private nuclear power plants to operate these things. Uh, so there are a number of key problems on all those fronts that affect the people who live in any one of these places devastatingly. Ecology, cost of living, um, basic health, living conditions in any place. But one of the one of the key problems in the data center struggle around the country is the ability to actually fight them off at all. Firstly, it has tended to require, on the municipal level, city councils and mayors that are actually willing to put up a fight, to pass ordinances, to pass other laws that restrict or ban these construction projects, or at the county level. Um, Similarly, you need county commissioners and administrators who are willing um, to battle these tech companies to keep them out of these areas. And where those are actually happening, where there are local politicians who are willing to put up a fight, even so, the tech companies that they are challenging have billions of dollars behind them and will and have filed lawsuits and waged legal battles against municipalities, counties, etc. Battles that those municipalities cannot actually afford to fight. So there have been cases in which one of the more recent ones I've heard about was in Wisconsin, in a town of like 3,000 people. of a city council that um, passed an ordinance banning the construction of a data center in the area, only to be sued by, I believe the companies were Oracle and OpenAI together. Um, a lawsuit was filed that the city could not actually battle. They had no funds to do so. Um, so the construction is, of course, underway as a result. They had to settle. So for us in Southern Oregon, this is also a two-pronged problem. Beyond the ecology, beyond the utility costs, other costs of living, uh, we face the problem in uh, especially in Douglas County, of having city councils, of having a county commission that very likely will bend a knee to the first project of that kind that comes our way. And in the case that a city council like Roseburg's, which is, of course, just expanded its urban growth boundary further west, which could potentially provide space for a some size of data center if a tech company from Silicon Valley was interested in doing so. It's possible. In that case, do we have the means to actually challenge these legally, even if we have a favorable city council or a county commission? And considering the fiscal crisis of most counties in the state of Oregon and the state of Oregon itself, there doesn't really seem to be an immediate way to wage that battle. I think what it means is we have to really rethink how such a battle can be fought at all, what kinds of institutions we're going to need, and how to challenge these things in a way other than with a high level of finance to support a legal battle.
I
Well,
was,
that's a very good point about the ability of any city, at the size even of Roseburg, which is a little bit bigger than 3,000, to fight any corporation that wants to fight the battle in court. Do they really have it? And even like with the protest about ICE, right? That's going on right now, they withstand that kind of pressure from the federal government if people were trying to interfere, or the federal government thought it was interfere, not just corporation. But that's a really good. Sorry, John, you were going to say something.
yeah, what, they always argue that it's, it's going to provide jobs. I mean, how many how many jobs these data centers would actually provide for the local population?
Well, this research I've been doing about it is that, other than the initial build of a data center, there's very few jobs. But I didn't even know we were going to specifically talk about this today, or I would have, probably been more equipped with numbers. But it said relatively few of the jobs that are created. And it makes sense. They're data centers, right?
Right.
They're artificial intelligence, or not really artificial intelligence, but
Mhm. Well, that's also something that has happened in Douglas County historically. The boom of new industry has often relied mainly on temporary labor. So I think I might have brought up in a previous conversation that we've had on SOPP the coming of the railroad in Roseburg. Roseburg in the mid to late 1870s and early 1880s was the railroad terminus of the Oregon and California Railroad. And it's usually considered to be the time when Roseburg was put on the map effectively. It had a commercial boom. It was a depot for the uh, passengers on a train to stop off, for cargo on a train to stop off and be transferred to stagecoach lines going south, and of course in the other direction going north. But in that time, this commercial boom was largely fueled by migrant workers who did not settle, to a significant extent, did not settle in the Roseburg area or Douglas County, largely because the land was grabbed up by a handful of people, and the folks who came in to do um, the manual labor, to maintain the railroads, or the service jobs that popped up surrounding the railroad industry. Um, they did not have the means to stay. So as soon as those were no longer needed, and particularly after the railroad was extended south of Roseburg, a lot of people ended up having to leave. So similarly, I think in this case, if a project like a data center were to um, be imposed in a city like Roseburg or elsewhere in Douglas County, yeah, you'd probably see a handful of temporary jobs. A lot of manual laborers would probably be shipped in. I really don't think that it would involve as many local laborers as one would like to think. In a lot of these cases, historically, workers are brought in from other areas to do the labor, often because they can be hired more cheaply. This is, of course, what happens in the agricultural sector with migrant labor, which also has happened in Douglas County. I've witnessed it myself. I formerly worked in agriculture when I was younger. Um, Cheaper labor um, is plentiful, but also um, it also means that it isn't something that necessarily helps the economy of the local area either. And that doesn't have to do with migrant labor so much as the separation of the of a data center from the work life of the existing community in general.
Well, there's another issue related to jobs and I mean, they talk about the wonders of AI and all what it's going to do, but what we know it does is it eliminates jobs. So I don't see any discussion about what happens to everybody, all these people that inevitably lose their jobs because of AI. I mean, if we were in a different if we were in a different economic system, a different political system, I mean, this could be the workers' paradise. You don't have to work because AI is taking is doing your work, but our current economic system is they don't give a shit about you. So you aren't, you're out in the street without a job and they don't care. So,
Well, so it's not entirely true that hypothetically, with this technology, you could have a paradise where nobody has to work, because this is a what we call AI, which is generally large language models, or LLMs. which are like glorified, they're glorified transformer programs. So like on if you're using like a Word document or an email software, it's the glorified equivalent of predictive text software, like suggested words in order as you're typing out an email or something of that sort. That's the basis for these programs. That's the T in Chat GPT transformer. Um,
And if you ask
these
them, if you ask AI, it'll tell you that. Because I used to use, I said, yeah, I used to use Boolean search in DOS when in the 80s for legal, you know, work. And we had to be very specific, right? Language, we had to be very specific terms. And it would only get literally that out because the technology is different, a little bit different with the AI models. But the concern I had is what we were talking about earlier is people who are using AI, people I know and respect in the community. I can tell they're AI and stuff, and I do it all the time. But you have to be very cautious of knowing enough about the subject matter or doing research after whatever they give you to verify the accuracy of the information because it is a predictive language model. And you're the one actually, probably 6 months ago when you corrected us to say it's a large language model, got me piqued my interest in, what the way this is all constructed. And it is it can make mistakes. And I know that it does, like in housing. So I do stuff in housing and homeless all the time. And even in a recent analysis I did of the last election here in the county data, it was showing me data that was wrong. And I knew it was because I was just reading the Secretary of State's website about the numbers of, the percentage spreads of what happened in the county commissioner's race. If I had not known that, right, or hadn't documented it from the source and I looked at what their source was, it was Ballotpedia instead of the Secretary of State's website. And I said, go get the real source, the Secretary of State's website. And then it apologizes. So it gives you this idea that they're like human, right? So we give this human persona to it. But then, that was the problem is that even what source, so it's word based, right? And it's predicting what they think you say. But I did a post this week on my Facebook page that it doesn't have emotions. It doesn't think like humans think, right? And it's flawed because of that. And I know, and I also mentioned before we started recording about I've been following the courts, and believing the AI that lawyers are now using are much better and clearer than say Gemini, because I use open case, which is one specifically around the legal stuff, but you still have to check that. And now courts are starting to look at making lawyers disclose that what they're filing with the court has been generated by AI or assisted AI, and they're going to scrutinize it more heavily.
Yeah.
So if we take that into the other thing where it's already infiltrated to a big degree for a long time, is the medical field. So this garbage is already out there.
Yeah.
So, you have the environmental problem, including water and water shortages, which we were talking about earlier. And then you have this whole reliability. And then the other thing is they say they believe we're getting dumber, right? Just because of the internet, but certainly is we're not thinking and using critical analysis. We're not educating ourselves about the backgrounds that lead to some of these answers. So it can be dangerous or harmful, in a multitude of areas. So,
I could certainly speak to that in an instructional position in a university. My students are rabid users of these programs, certainly to their detriment. But I don't want to miss the point I wanted to hit on from addressing John's statement about labor, because this is technology, and to answer the matter of like thinking like a human or not, Betsy, these are machines. They don't think.
Of
That's
course, yes.
important for everybody to understand. They're not thinking. They're not beings. They're not entities. They are machines. Just in the same way that a um, like pie machine is a machine, or a conveyor belt is a machine, or your laptop is a machine. Um, these are not, these don't have intellectual abilities as they should probably be understood. They're not, they are not organic. They are not creatures. They're not organisms. But to address John's statement, so labor is still ultimately necessary to maintain and to use to make these technologies do anything that they do. One of the unseen and widespread forms of labor that supports what you see in the chatbot interface of a program like a ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude is data annotation, a lot of which is outsourced, the vast majority of which is outsourced overseas to highly impoverished parts of the world and take advantage of highly vulnerable people. Um, this kind of data annotation um, uh, involves combing through information and working with this software to correct it, to steer it, to train it, and can involve some pretty gruesome things. Most famously, well, ChatGPT has been known to do this among other LLMs, but especially the one that is owned by Elon Musk under his, well, it was called his company was called XAI, but it's been technically bought out by SpaceX, his own other company now, a program called Grok, which is kind of notorious for spitting out um, uh, like neo-Nazi dog whistles and very explicit statements on Twitter, now just called X. But this software program, this LLM, has notoriously um, been spitting out such extreme things as child pornography in its generations. And there's kind of a joke that I've caught wind of that Grok should best be understood as a child pornography generating machine, first and foremost. And that seems to be what it's largely used for online. But also, um, it emerges in the training process as well. So laborers who are doing data annotation work, some of whom are like in Venezuela or in Kenya and elsewhere, are having to be exposed to some of the most horrifying material you could possibly imagine, um, on uh, on levels at or beyond what we already know has been the case with content moderation on platforms like Facebook in the last 10 years, more than 10 years. Extreme like sexual violence and pornographic material that scars people for life and like even ruins their own interpersonal relationships, among other things. That's the other side of this technology. And that's also that's to say nothing about the wide range of labor that's used to, say, generate the electricity to power this stuff, to supply the water, to cool the computers that operate this stuff, to get the materials out of the ground and process to build the data centers, much less, of course, building the thing itself. There's a lot of labor that goes into the maintenance of so-called AI that should not be written off. There is not there is not a world in which these programs are alleviating labor. They still require immense labor and new forms of labor, some of which we probably can't quite conceive of yet. But just as say like computer work might have been unfathomable to somebody 300 years ago, down the road, there are going to be forms of labor that maintain these kinds of systems that we can't really imagine right now. We could speculate about to some degree, but they will be there. Ultimately, all value stems from human labor.
So what are the cautionary tales we have to look out for right now? And um, is there a way to stop what is happening? Because my concern is I see so many people that don't really care, right? And even I am willing to ignore, some of these potential risks. Uh, and as, I became more aware of the problem with the reliability, am much more vigilant maybe than other people are in ensuring that, anything that I use from there is validated somewhere else, right? There's a source and research is done. But I'm not sure the majority of people are doing that or even aware of the problem. Um, and so what do we do? I mean, at this point, can we stop it? Is that even really an option?
Uh, I would say yes. In with the understanding that nothing is inevitable. And nothing is inevitable because people can intervene in any development. Um, and it should be remembered that there is widespread backlash to not just the data centers, but also to the imposition of LLMs increasingly into seemingly every area of life, into your email inbox, into your Google web search as of this last week, into uh, into basic even government services. Um, phone calls for like your if you're like trying to call your insurance company, like forced to talk to LLMs in some cases, and probably increasingly so. Um, I don't see I don't see the coming years without that also being imposed increasingly in in government services. So if you're trying to like call the IRS offices because of some tax snafu, that's probably what you're going to end up talking to. Um, but there's widespread backlash to this. We have to remember that. Like even while we have very weak civil institutions, um, and uh, in cases where the majority of a community protests and convinces their politicians to pass legislation or pass an ordinance that is meant to block the building of data centers or the imposition of LLM technologies. Um, if even though there's no uh, there may not be financial means to fight these things immediately. Understanding that so many people across the country are rejecting this stuff, or at the very least are skeptical and critical of it, is meritable. There is certainly a counter movement against the imposition of LLMs and the costs to human life that are being wrought as a result of it, human life and non-human life. I think for us in Southern Oregon, the first thing to understand is that these impositions cannot be fought without new forms of politics. I don't see that merely trying to fight these off with the existing systems of municipal finance and our city council and county commission systems will be enough, especially because even in the short term, these may appear to be, if not bringing jobs into the local area, bringing investments, capital, finance into local coffers, one way or another. That can already be seen in projects like at Fir Grove Park in Roseburg. It's framed as an investment opportunity, an opportunity to bring in outside finance capital because because we're broke, because there's no money. So I think we have to understand that we need new political forms to properly fight these things. We need things like we need bodies like what's being tried with the People's Homeless Commission that don't just enter into municipal politics that presently exist, but also stand apart from them. Because ultimately these things are not going to be beaten by finance alone. They're going to be beaten by forcing tech companies out. And I mean by force. Like that's what it takes. If a construction project of a data center, hypothetically in Douglas County, is being imposed on us, lawsuits are not going to stop that. A community banding together and like standing together at the construction site to prevent it from being built might be the only thing that actually stops it. But to do that, you need the political bodies that can organize that can not just galvanize people, but also educate people, and do both at the same time. Need stronger civic institutions in order to fight this stuff. So if leave the finance aside, even though we're broke, the first step is we need strong civic institutions, period. We need to understand first and foremost that citizenship is not
Spectator sport.
It's not a spectator sport. It's not something that you're just born with. It's something that you have to do. Citizenship is a practice. And citizenship also is protecting your community from being destroyed. And that's the kind of existential threat that something like a data center, at the very least, poses, among other things. There are plenty of other existential threats, but that's certainly a big one right now.
Dane.
Well, no, and I think, that could be our motive, is how to give people an understanding of their citizenship and what it includes. And I think, it's rethinking. It's kind of like what we're doing here, what Zach said, with the People's Homeless Commission, the advocacy around ICE is we need to change the mindset of people, and we need everybody to change. We need more involvement. We just saw, even, I know it's a primary, but we still only saw a 40% participation rate in a vote. And it was a very important vote because we could have changed the outcome. And it's like, how do we? So I think it's like educating on its citizenship and what it means is like it means getting involved, being a part, and we can change the outcome because we kind of I think everybody in this nation just sits back and sits in their chair, watches on the phone what's happening in our world, but they don't get in directly involved. So how do we educate people better to really get directly involved? And this whole AI, I put some things in the chat. It's like that information. I was reading an article the other day. It's like it can be so easily manipulated only to show you what it wants to show you. And we know Elon Musk would definitely use this to his advantage and many multiple, Donald Trump. I mean, these very evil, even Democrats. I mean, I think a lot of our leaders, we have begun to not really trust any of them. And so I think, anybody could sway this information in a way to achieve what they want to. So we need to start grassroots like we are in so many levels, but it includes so many other things. But maybe that should be our motive is how to be a good citizen and make a list of what is required to be an adult. And, is voting and it's advocating and it's changing the outcome.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
Well, it certainly isn't only a matter of education, of better informing people. That's, of course, a huge element of this. But also, people have material needs and material interests. In the case of, say, the People's Homeless Commission, the major difference between a popular assembly model like that and, say, the city council model that presently exists in the city of Roseburg, among other places, is the kind of participation, the kind of the ability to shape and participate in the organization of the material and social world. It's very different in those two models. In a city council, participation, agency, political agency is limited to the voting for a city councilor or a mayor every few years. The rest of the time, you're at the mercy of them. Which is to say, like, you are politically free like one day every 4 years with respect to each politician. Every other day, you're in servitude. You're at their mercy. As opposed to a popular assembly model in which, especially with the recurrence of meetings and the lack of representatives of politicians who are elected, who are yielded agency by voters who are rendered as like constituents, people actually are participants and have agency consistently, continually through that process. I find that the apathy, when it is apathy and not inability to participate in electoral process for one reason or another, like if somebody doesn't vote, oftentimes it's because they can't for one reason or another. That's especially apparent in like historically in like the US South when people are like terrorized and threatened or materially repressed, having to work to put food on the table instead of standing in line for a whole day to vote, as an example. The To the degree that that there's an apathy, that people are not voting consciously, even if they have the ability to. My understanding is that it's in large part because people are not stupid. They understand that participation in what we call politics which is kind of a farcical way to understand politics, is not something that they actually have agency in. The best you've got is a vote every few years for a politician who you're then at the mercy of. And even then, your vote is up against whole masses of people who are swayed either by campaigns of propaganda, an election campaign that's convincing people to vote for this or that person, making lovely appeals. Tim Freeman pumped a bunch of money into ad campaigns during this election season in Douglas County. But also, when politicians are elected in office and and they're sitting on city council or a county commission, what do you have for your participation? At best, you have public comment. If that. Does that have any weight to it? Not necessarily. If you're a mob of people who have certain commercial ties to people on the city council, if you have shared interest and you form as a mob to threaten those shared interests, then something might happen. But that requires like a certain like solidarity, for lack of a better word, between city council people and the members of an angry mob that shows up, who are often like people who call themselves small business owners who are wanting to like bring investment into the county or city or something of that sort, which usually is used to justify some pretty heinous things, ecologically destructive or socially destructive moves. So the apathy, I think, is understandable. Like a
I think
lot
it's
of
under, I
that.
think it's understandable, but I don't think it's as simple as people already know. What they know is that government is dysfunctional, right? They don't really know how government works. I mean, every primary season, particularly this, even numbered years, I'm reminded about how much people don't understand the difference between partisan elections and nonpartisan elections. I mean, I'm talking about people who vote, you know, uh, progressive people that just don't seem to get it, and so part of that I think is, intentional. You have to be carefully taught to be stupid, right? I think it's intentional not to have informed citizenry from the time that we're children. And, we are very different than other, like, say, European countries who find it more important for their citizen. And I don't even know what their voter turnout is, but that kind of stuff is, um, perceived self-interest. I think you're right. There's an economic side to this. So I don't know that just, seeing this as your civic duty is a convincing argument. My life is kind of documented to me that it is not the argument that's going to sway people in mass to start voting. So what are you interested in? Keeping ICE out, right? That was a political issue. So if we can do the same thing, and even with the People's Homeless Commission, that will have to deal with that already structured government body, right? We are going to have to come in with that mass and the knowledge, right? That's kind of what we're doing, and trying to get enough support that we can ice them, but even then, you'll see by the ordinance is pretty much saying we're going to follow state law, right? It isn't anything more profound or say we're going to do this. And even the email that I had sent them that said, you can at least follow the law. I also said, and you can inform the public about their rights, about the complaint procedure if ICE does this, right? And so I saw no mention of that regarding, they're going to make sure that every citizen or every resident in Douglas County is aware of, the limits of ICE in our community. And then there's already blowback against, what they're already doing, because people are angry. So, but that agency that people don't have, I mean, I've just watched this for all my life, really, it's been all of my, um, I do think people are less engaged than maybe in my childhood in politics, but the most of the people in our working middle class neighborhood that I grew up in, there weren't mass amounts of people with political signs in their yard, and I'm sure that they had very little engagement. Just in retrospect, although I didn't pay attention the way I do now because I was a kid, but my parents and a few other people would have political signs, but probably most of them voted. That would be my guess, that the people in that neighborhood, most of them were homeowners, right? Had, you know, relatively decent paying jobs back then. Dane, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, I encountered that today. Like, I'm on that ICE chat on Signal, and they were talking about like, oh, well, Roseburg's, and there was an indefensible post today. That there's two policies. There's one promoting ICE, and I'm like, has anybody asked? Like, have I reached out to Ruth, Zach, Katie, Andrea, and just asked the questions? Like, what are the because all we're aware of is they've only proposed one thing, and it has to go through a first reading, a second reading, then a vote, then you can change it. But
Because it's an
you know,
ordinance, not a resolution. And
yeah, the
so the
ordinance.
different, but see, a resolution like the Pride, if it, resolution, which,
But
this is Pride Month, almost Pride
and
Month,
instead of
that's a
doing the proper,
resolution.
instead of asking questions of the people that know, they're assuming. And it's like you can't
Right.
assume. I'm like, that was my first. Like, has anybody reached out to these people? No. And it's like, well, they'll probably have an answer. So I reached out to Ruth, and Ruth was like, no, we're going forward with the ordinance, and then we're going to change it with some resolutions. And it's like, so, I mean, it would just be helpful. People stir up emotion instead of asking the people that know the questions. And it's just a better angle. I mean, you're like that, Betsy. You're going to ask the question of the people that are in power. And it's like,
That's right.
hey, and it's like, why don't we start with that step and then we know what to, better instead of stirring people's emotion, because emotion
I think
doesn't
I have,
necessarily.
yeah, no, that's difficult because it's like, I don't want to interrupt you either, but like, it's like, how do you get any traction with that? Because, um, anyway, I was going to say that there's like 10 things that are like trying to funnel into this, uh, conversation, for me because of like, what Zach was saying earlier about civic institutions. Like we need strong civic institutions. So how do we get that? Well, we need more leisure time to choose, or like people need to choose to use whatever, off time they have to like engage in building these civil institutions, because the voting, like we said, we already decided the voting can is like not really working. So we need to have more actual civic engagement. Um, and so I don't know where I was going with that, but like, um, shit, what you were just saying about going to the proper channels, okay, sure. What I heard from Donovan was he talked to Zach, and Zach was like, well, we'll deal with ICE if they show up, or whatever. I was like, okay, you know, that's my third hand information from, but often it is kind of like it's the same as voting. Like we're very uninformed about who the proper channels would be. People often don't really know how to navigate that. Like I hardly even can figure it out myself. So, but then also like the interest in going to find the channels, the proper people that know or whatever, which depending on what information you're trying to find, it could be the government or any number of whatever experts that we're trying to kind of gather first, in the whole conversation to kind of like dispel any rumors or whatever that might be happening first, right? But since we can't really do that as on an individual level very effectively, it's at least, to sway any kind of public decision, it feels like And that's why I kind of like tend to stir up some drama about this shit because I'm like, is anybody paying attention? Because if you don't really go for yourself and find out, like you're saying, for yourself from the people who know, who are the experts, probably if you're talking about homeless people, the people down there that are experiencing this daily, then you don't really, and so in this case, you're talking about the government, like we need to talk to city council. And if that's what I heard from somebody who went and talked to city council is that, oh, we're going to wait till ICE gets here and then we'll decide what to do. That's, it shows me that there's no confidence to be had with the city council because they're not even really powerful anyway. It's the manager that calls the shots. So
No, wait
really,
a
we're
second.
cut
Wait a
off
second.
from
Wait a
all of
second.
this.
No,
Really.
I
Go ahead.
think
Yeah.
I think it's a
Yeah.
misconception what people
Definitely.
imagine government does and what government is supposed to do on paper. Okay. So when you say that the experts come out of City Hall, I beg to differ. When it comes to housing and homelessness, you have
No, I
two
didn't.
in this room,
I'm not saying
and
that.
two
No.
in this room of five that have a high level of expertise in homelessness, me and Dane, right? So it's what they have, why you have to go to them is that you have to know what they believe they're supposed to be doing. You have to know what they understand they are to do, but there are all kinds of resources if you want to understand municipal government as an adult. It's one of like the Donna Cohen who was here, a few weeks ago. That's what she teaches people that are adults to how to figure out and understand those structures. And if anybody has any kind of question about how Douglas County government is supposed to run, how the city councils are supposed to run state government, hunt me down. I do have a level of expertise and can give people resources of where to find that technical stuff. But even then, people aren't going to, that's a heavier lift to get people to understand that. So on their own, they can write an email to the chief of police and say what's going on with these sweeps instead of harassing a cop that's enforcing the law on the beat. Okay. So the problem is that you do need to understand that power structure within government and know whether the appropriate person to reach out to is a city manager. Or it's your elected officials who actually, no matter what they say, do have great power, such as the ability to fire a city manager who is not actually carrying out the policies that they want. And that structure exists at every level of our government in theory. And I'm going to say in theory because, just because it's written doesn't mean how it's followed. But I think the way you engage people is their own self interest and them showing up at City Hall, because that's the first step that most people will take. They'll either pick it or go to City Hall or write an email. They're not going to go learn about everything City Hall is supposed to be doing and start picking battles based on that. They're going to do it on whatever piques their interest. I've raised this issue before. I'm doubtful that homelessness will get the reaction that ICE got at city council and demanding that. But even demanding that, um, what it is an ordinance is a law. A resolution is an advisory opinion or a guidance position. It is, or a declaration of support for something like with the Pride resolution. They're not even the equivalent thing under the law. Okay. So the ordinance is a law and it has more power than a resolution, although there may be a resolution to pass an ordinance. So, because
Well, like,
one is a document and one is a process.
so the ordinance, for example, they ban the needles in the park. That's an ordinance, right?
That's an ordinance,
Yeah.
yes.
And so, yeah. And so, like, to get any kind of ordinance passed, like Zach was saying, I think it requires an allegiance kind of between the city council and whatever entity they're trying to, govern or whatever, right? I mean,
Or
so
mass demand, right? Mass demand. I mean,
mass
ICE,
demand, but that didn't even work. I mean, it only works when they're in accordance with their interests, right? I mean, it's even with ICE, it's like they weren't listening, to the public comment. They weren't like responding to any of that. They didn't need to feel the need
until
to
they
like,
got 700 petition signatures.
Mhm.
on the online
Right.
petition.
And so
I mean,
that's what's affected, right?
that's what makes them pay attention. It's
Mhm.
why I don't go to city council
Right. It's your point.
meetings to take
Yeah.
2 to 6 minutes lecturing them on what's the right thing to do.
Right.
My
It doesn't.
experience
Yeah.
has taught me they don't give a shit. Okay.
That's a
Because
good
if they
point.
did,
Because and what I'm saying is like, the level of hearsay or misinformation that's just flowing freely every day is a lot to keep up with. I think for a lot of people, because I keep hearing people say there's no internal affairs for the police department here. What does that mean? Let's unpack that. Maybe not right now, but I was talking to somebody else too who says
there's an
they were
internal complaint procedure. There's a police policy manual that I have a copy of because I asked the chief of police for it.
yeah.
Okay.
It's all
It's,
very yeah.
and no, there is a process of
Hmm.
complaint and follow through on police discipline. But unless you understand what that is, and also keep in mind that employed cops have due process rights as employees, like everyone else does, right? So, and they're not going to go out and, slap the cop for doing the wrong thing on the street because somebody complained. They're going
Yeah.
to, go through their internal procedures, what we may not have the right to see or hear about because it becomes a personnel matter, right? So, like everybody else's personnel business, if something happens on anyone's
Right.
job
Right.
here, you don't want it to be on the front page of the newspaper, right?
Hmm.
So,
Newspaper.
um,
Do we have a front
you know,
page of the newspaper?
no, I don't. Do we have a newspaper anymore? It's online something. Yeah. I don't know that there's a front page. Good point.
Which is another issue. But yeah, I mean, the other thing I wanted to say was people don't. I don't think that people do things without some strong emotional attachment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
That's right.
kind of almost impossible to get anybody to do anything if they're. I mean, it is pretty natural. So that's the part I'm having trouble with is like how I don't want to exacerbate people's emotions unnecessarily. That's fucking not my goal. But to inform people that there's more to look at, and it's probably going to take a little more like a sacrifice from personal, sacrifice of your time or whatever and your attention. And it's kind of tragic that people think it's not their job. Or I mean, like I was talking to this guy at the Smiles feed today, and they're the religious people and stuff. And I was just telling them, you're kind of like, kind of telling them how they're often are very, condescending and stuff. And well, they were like, I
Did
don't
you
know, just the
save
way
them?
people talk about things is really dumb. They're like, you're gonna wait for the government? I'm like, no, I'm gonna put pressure on the government to try to actually do something about shit. But yeah, anyway.
So did you save them from their misguided religious
I think
beliefs?
I think they started listening after a while. They kind of started, they're like, I had them a little speechless a couple times because I'm getting pretty good at kind of like saying it how I see it, more directly, and because they'll twist up the conversation and make it all muddy, and then they're back to saying, in heaven, blah blah blah. I'm like, this is imaginary. You can appeal to my imagination, but you're not going to tell me that it's, heaven is 100% the truth, and you have to believe the same shit that you do. Like
Well,
seriously.
I think that there's a good experiment. I think you should go every Sunday when they're there and have these conversations, and we'll see whether you convert them or they quit showing up. Either one of them would be a good thing. So,
Good point. Right.
uh, um,
Okay.
my guess is going to be the second that they're just going to quit showing up to your space.
Right, they'll find
But
another spot. Yeah.
well, they
Um,
were actually over in the park over by the point, weeks before. So if they were actually there at the feed today, that's a newer development.
yeah.
Um, so uh, so where else are we on this? You want to?
I
Think
got
we've
another thing that's on my mind.
I just
Go ahead.
I just emailed everybody a little article from the Central Oregon Land Watch from March of last year about stopping data center developments in in Eastern Oregon. So it's just a little extra from a little bit extra information from what we discussed. So look for it in your emails. It'll be exciting.
All right. So there was something that I saw. I get the Oregon, what is it, Chronicle? That's an online newspaper. Actually, it has some pretty good, Capital Chronicle. It has some interesting, stuff that they follow. And there was a report, and it might have been out of the Oregon Center, um, Oregon Policy Center, that studied the numbers of SNAP recipients in Oregon and who their employers are. And did anybody else catch that? Or it says Oregonians using SNAP benefits most frequently listed big grocery retail companies as their employers. So Oregon Public Universities and Amazon, its affiliates, were also among those most listed as employers on SNAP income verification forms.
Wow.
So that is who we are subsidizing with taxpayer dollars, the wages of their employees. And that has been known as far as companies like Walmart. But, from, a theory of capitalism, that would seem to me if they need these subsidies for people, they actually don't provide a necessary service to make the kind of money that they do. And so they were listing, let me see which of the grocery stores, the SNAP benefits.
And I would agree with that, Betsy, because like towards the end of my Kmart career, like full-time employment was 32 hours. That was the direction of the company and that is standard. You have to pay benefits over 30 hours. And so full-time is now not 40 hours necessarily with agencies, it's 30. And then I was down to like with the budget they gave me, I was employing, I would struggle to give my part-time associates 3 to 4 hour shifts. And so they had to have 3 to 4 jobs. And I think that's, yes, that was a bad company and they were in a horrendous hurt, but Walmart, I'm sure, is no different because a lot of our management in the later years came over from Walmart to try to like change the company. So I think, we're retail is horrible. And that's one of the biggest, and restaurant is not much better like McDonald's. And, they have that same strategy is to make a buck.
Yeah.
And,
Particularly fast food restaurant.
we're paying for their people. We're paying for their insurance because I'm sure, all my part-timers were on OHP and, a lot of them were on food stamps and it's horrendously sad. It was horrible. I used to just shake my head. I did not know what to schedule. How do you, there were days that I didn't even have when I was working on that schedule. I didn't even have enough money to give everybody a shift.
Well, according to the Oregon this analysis, Albertson Safeway was number one employer with SNAP recipients. Walmart, not surprising, too. I remember a few years ago there was a big story out on, about Walmart uh, having this list of telling their employees how to live with little money, and also at the holiday times, some of them, and I never saw one in the store here, having signs that says help, the help supplement the employees' wages at holidays for their food donation collection boxes. Then Amazon is number three, Oregon Department of Human Services. Now that's a very interesting thing. Fred Meyer Kroger, Oregon State University, New Horizons, Altrua Home Care LLC, and then McDonald's, Express Employment Professionals, and the University of Oregon. There you go, Zach.
Yes, a number of my colleagues, fellow graduate students, are reliant on SNAP. It's a major problem. The when the funding for that was in jeopardy late last year, um, when it was held on pause, uh, there were peers of mine who were scrambling to find money to buy groceries. And these are, these are graduate students at a university, working for a university too.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
we've got a strong union, even with one of the probably the strongest union of graduate employees in the entire country. We still struggle to get our members there to well get any graduate employee a decent wage. It's also why we're pressing for a 10% raise in our contract this year because people can't keep up with the cost of living otherwise.
John wanted to say something.
yeah, it's related to this. I saw a report last week put out by the state of Oregon, I think, uh, breaking suicide rates based upon occupation, and the highest group of that commits suicide rate in Oregon are those working in forestry and agriculture, uh, basically very volatile fields, and then it gave a list. It just different occupations. Those with by far and away the lowest uh, suicide rates were in business and finance. A very sad uh, example of what capitalism is all about. So it was, I found it very interesting.
Well, clearly the lie that, that capitalists are self-sufficient, right? That this is the whole argument. They could do things better. The fact that so many of their employees, are on SNAP, and which also makes them eligible most likely for Oregon Health Plan benefits, as Dane mentioned about some of the employees that Kmart had, but also public housing. And actually, you can make more than maybe the SNAP benefit and still get public housing. It's a little bit higher income level. And so when you look at, capitalism and then government, I mean, that's a different issue, but it seems to me a bit ironic that people working for either University of Oregon or Oregon State having to get SNAP benefits is, kind of ridiculous. And I don't know how that justifies it given the tax kicker or anything else that we, give to, supplement, tax breaks to the rich in Oregon.
Well, I think what your unions need to do, Zach, is to get some an IL an IO what is that the NIL agreements that all the football players have. Then you could if you could get I'm not you could get Nike to back you guys, you'd make a lot more money.
Well, Uncle Phil is quite stingy. But of course, his entire business model is built on abject slavery.
Besides my tenure of boycotting Walmart, I also can't remember other than one other time buying a Nike product ever because of where those shoes were coming from, right? This exploitation of this high, you know, middle class, thrill-seeking shoes.
Yeah,
The irony of the poverty they cause.
sure. Yeah. Well, there's also certainly an example um of the um idiocy of Oregon state politicians um begging for billionaires to stay in the region. There's
Mhm.
Phil Knight, who is the richest man in who lives in the state of Oregon, who does who has pumped a lot of funding in certainly into the athletics department at the University of Oregon, money that the rest of the university does not see. Um, uh, his company, Nike, does not really provide jobs to a significant degree in the state of Oregon. The main base of employment are poor contract laborers in Southeastern East Asia. And that was the business model from the get-go
Yep.
to undercut competition, is Japanese competition by by getting contracts with cheap sweatshop labor in parts of Asia, which over the years, and especially in the 90s when Nike was under very close scrutiny, when I want to say it was the president of the University of Oregon at the time had fake blood poured on him by student activists as a result. Um, the findings from human rights groups and journalists was that people were like dying on the job in these sweatshops. And of
Yeah.
course, Nike says, well, we couldn't have possibly known that. But those are the workers. Those are the primary base of workers who make bank for Phil Knight. Um, so let's not fall prey to these cries from the rich, especially that have cropped up around the New York City election for the mayoral election. We elect we elect a radical politician in office, and he's going to demand the imposition of a wealth tax or a progressive income tax, and it's going to scare all the billionaires away. We need the billionaires. Well, currently, the billionaires in Oregon don't do anything for us. They slap their names on buildings with one-time donations, um, build up a dependency that they don't keep up, and institutions crumble. Portland State University is a good example of this. At Portland State University, there have been billionaires, one of whom being Jordan Schnitzer, one of the richest men in the Pacific Northwest, who I've actually met. He's a complete schmuck. Um, he's donated he's donated some money to renovate this or that building, of course, with funds matched from state bonds. So there's always strings attached. They never are, of course, paying for the full thing. But renovating these nice schmancy new museums, slapping names of billionaires onto buildings or whole programs. The program that I graduated from at Portland State University was the College of Art and Design, or the School of Art and Design, and now it's the Jordan D. Schnitzer School of Art and Design. But the university is facing like a huge deficit. They are faced with the need to make major cuts in programs. Even here at the University of Oregon, we're facing now a $65 million deficit that was announced just in the last couple weeks by the university president. Um, those donations are, renovating buildings that have to be kept up, or building up departments that have to be kept up. And without consistent financial support, the university crumbles. They create new kinds of scales that can't be maintained. So I find that to be a key part of the problem, this reliance on finance capital, on credit, on charity that ultimately doesn't sustain our public institutions, or even a company for that matter. Like companies go under because they start with credit, they start with loans. If they can't pay those back, they're toast. They file for bankruptcy.
And is that what
Goodbye.
kind of private equity does, is actually, load debt, to take out money that then if it files bankruptcy, the whole thing, even corporate law, is a big scam, right? To protect the individual financial interest of the investors from any liability, no matter what they do.
Yeah. A reform that I've seen proposed in past decades. This was something that was on the platform of the Burlington Greens back in the 1980s, when they not only helped Bernie Sanders get into office, but then also fought him when he was in office. A demand that was central on their platform was the establishment of a municipal bank that could
Yeah.
provide low interest loans to locals. It's municipally controlled, not simply a credit union, like not like Rogue Credit Union or Cascade Community Credit Union in Southern Oregon, but actually something that is under the auspices of municipal government, with a common fund that is maintained by municipal government.
Or even a state bank. And, people have floated that from time to time, an Oregon State Bank, which would actually address some of these problems of capital because the profit doesn't need to feed the hungry beasts of the rich, right? This is, when these structures, and this is the whole fallacy of privatization of, that somehow that's better than government running something, healthcare, bank financing, housing, right? Most of the people who make most of the money are private individuals or companies, right, in the housing industry. Whether, it's the people who are buying their own home are not the beneficiaries of that, really. Even if they own it 30 years and get some money out of it, they've also paid 2 or 3 times what the asking price was by the financing scheme, right? So
Yeah.
the reality is it's made by the developers and then the financiers of housing. So, and it's then creates a speculative market, which is, another aspect of the problems of capitalism. When something like a basic needs becomes in that speculative market, that's what's really kind of been the problem of affordable housing for decades.
Yeah. I expect that in the city of Roseburg, that's going to be ramping up to another degree, because of the Charter Oaks urban growth boundary expansion, which was explicitly done, professedly, to make room for new housing construction.
But not for
That
poor people.
definitely not. But that certainly opens up more space for incoming land speculation. Very
Yeah,
like, well, almost
yeah,
undoubtedly, that is historically what happens.
yeah. Um,
Goodbye, Roseburg.
so anything else we want to talk about? Somebody want to bring up that happened recently?
Yeah, I can just ask a question. Did anybody go or watch any of the county budget budget hearings last week?
Tell us about it, John.
I jumped. Whoa, I only watched a little bit. Anyway, what I found out, and I posted on Facebook, is next week they're going to have the compensation committee hearings, which is the reverse of what they've always done in the past. The compensation committee, which is the same committee, would get together before the budget committee and evaluate the departments and needs and determine if there was going to be any pay increases and make recommendations. Of course, the commissioners always got, we're always recommended for the most pay increase. This year, they're doing it after the budget hearings, which it's to me it's very confusing. How can you discuss a budget if you don't know if anybody is going to be getting, it's going to be getting paid more? So, and maybe there's a reason for what they did. It was kind of a coincidence that compensation committee yearly would take place right before for elections. This year they postponed it until after the elections. So I don't know if that is politically motivated or not, but that's that in course the budget is just proposed and it'll be finalized by the commissioners. But I just found it interesting that it was conveniently any discussion of any pay increases was put off until after the election. So I just wanted to mention that. So.
Anybody else?
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I was trying to be on the budget committee, but they didn't get back to me. But I thought they did
City
the
or the
budget
county?
meetings in like June. Huh? Oh, for the county. Yeah. I
He's
guess I was
talking about the
forgetting that.
county.
Yeah, so the city's in June, right? They usually have the budget
Well, they're doing
meeting
it
for
now.
June.
They all have to pass their budget by the last day in June.
Yeah.
So all municipalities do in Oregon.
Right. Yeah, so speaking of budget, like I think the first part when we were talking about civil institutions need to be more robust. I think that's because they kind of just claim that they're broke and that's why they can't do anything. And that's always been the reason they can't do something that the people want is because there's no money for it. That was a state funded project. That was a corporate thing or whatever it was. There's never money for like the thing that we actually need to have done. And that's why our civil institutions need to be stronger so we can be like, why are we so broke? And I don't know, I just wanted to say that, I guess. But I have other stuff that's on my mind if you guys want to, if nobody has something else right now.
No, go ahead.
Well, because so I went to the recent sweeps. That's the first time I've been to sweeps in Roseburg or anywhere. And there was three kind of in a row within about 2 weeks. And I was there for the second and third one. And the second one, I got to kind of do some videos and I shared some stuff on Facebook, which, seems like that kind of trying to get people's attention and get people to pay attention more. And through, kind of appealing to the emotions a little bit, but not really intentionally in any way other than, hey, look, this is what I'm seeing. And here's my take on it or whatever. And so then the next one that happened on Wednesday, I was witness to this brutalization of this lady who was trying to move her stuff, the last part of her stuff. Anyway, I kind of, I feel like that's where we need to start, like really paying attention. And so I posted a screenshot of it on Facebook, and that just already felt really stupid and weird because it's like it's drawing all this attention that people want to see the video now, and it's like, I don't know. So anyway, I'm just kind of struggling with kind of processing all that myself since it's the first time I've like seen what's normal for the people that live outside and stuff. And so I've just come kind of like dumbfounded and realizing that if we all knew our rights more and knew what to say when these things are happening and what's going on, how to actually support people rather than just holding a video camera and being like, what the fuck is going on? I didn't think this was going to happen because it was very excessive. And the police escalated it from like her trying to reason with them all the way to like they had to draw their weapon and point it into the crowd because they thought somebody might, be a threat or something. I mean, this is a totally unarmed woman trying to move her stuff, grab the last of her belongings and move her tent during the sweep. Anyway, they just always go, oh, well, you were given 7 whole days to do this. And it's like, that isn't really relevant at that point. So there's like a humane way they could do the same job. Like they're like, well, you're obstructing our ability to maintain this park, so you have to leave right now and leave all your stuff here. And that's just an unreasonable request, kind of like from a human perspective to me. But so she's in jail still, and I was just talking to somebody who was just released and was in holding with her, and they told me, okay, well, they finally released her into like a dorm, a jail dorm or whatever today. And anyway, um, it's like $500 to bail her out right now. That's kind of just the stuff that, jail support is important. This person's case is probably very a public interest concern at this point, since there's, I don't know, some more attention on, I'm just struggling from my perspective, like, what the hell is the best thing to do? And why, the question I keep thinking is, where is the mental health, here? Because there's a lot of people down there that have accounts with like Adapt and stuff, and nobody's advocating for these people's, well-being during the sweeps. Like, where are they? I know HIV Alliance has been there doing stuff. I talked to Seth. He's seen some shit, and a lot of people get discouraged because then you're in the middle of it and you're trying to, you know, battle the cops now. Like, this is fucked up. So, and that's another thing I was going to say was like the cops and the police department isn't ever going to be on the list of people that have food stamps, or whatever. And so I don't know, just if there are any other thoughts on that, just kind of processing it myself and talking to
You
more
know,
people about
Max, what I would do, I mean, I think what you did, there's no easy answer here. And you're spot on with the mental health, and you're spot on that the resources aren't there. And I don't know if they have the ability. Adapt does run the mental health, and it's like it's definitely the biggest gap in our community. And but I think Betsy kind of said it, like reaching out to the chief of police and advocating, sending a link to the video to him and just go, hey, I was down there. I just have questions, and I want to know where the boundaries lie here. Get the information. Like Betsy said, she had the manual for the police department and how they're supposed to handle situations like that. And I'm not supporting or, not supporting the police. They don't give these officers, I think definitely they need mental health education. They need peer education. They really should, especially anyone that is like the homeless liaison. It would be good to benefit. So they're not supporting their officers in the ways they should with the education they need to support them to de-escalate a situation like that. Because, that woman, you know, was probably in mental health crisis, they don't understand that piece. It's like giving them whatever notice you are, they're not going to understand. And then it's like,
yeah.
how do we get more, and offer that as a suggestion? Like, Gary, is there a way for Chief Klopfenstein, is there a way to support getting more community healthcare workers ingrained in the police department to help, Officer Chavez? And maybe that would help instead of, having gunned officers go in is not a good answer, probably. And especially, but I would let them know that they were pointing the gun at others in the community. That's not a real good thing. And,
No, totally.
that's just training and support and leaving it with him. You may not get answers, but at least you put it to the right person.
We need a full audit of our police department. Like, we need to demand more than that. So what I'm saying is also, fuck, what was I forgot what I was just gonna fucking say. But yeah, it's really hard to deal with all this stuff because you got to go through the proper channels, and you got to, there's a lot of rage that happens, and people like blame the people that are most close to this stuff, and then like, it's anyway. I'll try to think of what I was gonna say a minute ago, but the training and the support for the officers and the de-escalation. Like, there was no de-escalation needed because the officers were the ones that escalated. From what I could see, it was very clear that they were the ones escalating it they had a hold of her wrist for like quite a bit of time before they said she was under arrest. And just anyway, I don't want to go through details or whatever the fuck, but like it's it's really something we need to be paying attention to more. Like I'm like blown away that uh I have to be unemployed and completely kind of hopeless myself to go out there and just be doing this shit. And like, I happen to have some, whatever, I don't know. I don't have any credibility necessarily even to say like something, but, I don't know, just finding where I fit in. We did a flea market behind my shop this weekend on Saturday. It was amazing. Very little planning or organization or effort, and a lot of people had a good time and contributed some money toward. And this is the thing I think of. Okay, this person needs $500, like as soon as possible. That's $150 we just made toward this case. If that's the People's Homeless Commission, interest or whatever. But like, we need to really band together or something around some real shit right now. And I haven't seen anybody getting posted again, but I'm sure they'll be doing another sweep soon. And I'm just going to kind of try to ramp up the public interest in this because, no public organization like Adapt or UCAN should be, like not letting people have services because I don't know. Even the mission, they keep saying, "Oh, we have so much resources." Like I saw a guy asking for some pants, and they didn't give him any pants, and he definitely needs some pants. There's no upward mobility here. It's really sick. And anyway, I'll just stop ranting and rambling now, though. But we're gonna do
regarding
more
the
flea markets for sure. We need to. That's a good idea.
That's it. So solve society's problem with the flea market. Get rid of your crap. You're recycling at least. There you go. Reusing. Following those 3 R's that just keeps creating more and more junk in the world. So, um, the People's Homeless Commission, their role is not to be advocates. That's a role of organizations like Housing First, Umqua. It's actually also particularly roles, of other organizations could take, but some of them, have perimeters that they perceive from their funders, for one. Right. So the kind of advocacy to assume that a person that does outreach or call themselves an advocate, let's say for UCAN, is going to go out there and stand toe to toe with a cop. For one, I don't even advise that. I don't stand toe to toe when I'm doing sweep watch. I just, stand there and record what's going on. For one, I watched part of that video, and I think that you should, we've talked about this, that you should probably put it all online. And you're going to get blowback like you already did for some of the pieces that people assume, like, oh, well, she was resisting arrest. And I pointed out on your post to the person who said that, well, you actually have to be, arrested for a crime before you can be resisting arrest. It can't be a charge in and of itself, but it was interference with the administrative process, which is kind of a catch-all thing. And that kind of phrase is misused. But I could see that the cop was getting more agitated because you were in the background filming him. And that's a problem, not for what you were doing. It's a problem with him, starting to lose, hopefully the agitation, was probably more about you than it was her, but she is the person he can take it out on. Right. And that becomes a problem when I tell people that they're going to do cop watching, that they need not to go toe to toe. Because when you turn your back and the person you think you're standing up for is left alone with that cop, sorry, I don't trust them enough to, not have them pick on the person they can get away with picking on than, an advocate. Because in the situations I've been in, I've really not had the cop be an adversary as long as, if you just stand there and watch, you can ask questions and you have the right to get clarification. But, until there's a lot of people willing to do it, I would avoid trying to, make the cop feel guilty about what they're doing, even. I mean, and they are carrying out policies, and I think I made this analysis. Yeah, just like the brown shirts and the SS, people can stand behind. I was told to do it because it was my job. Well, you have a moral obligation not to do that shit. But that's not a discussion a cop on the beat is even gonna entertain, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that a court watch would be good. And if that woman is going for an arraignment Monday, or if she's already been arraigned, and the problem is I don't know that there's a good, easy online access to municipal court records because that is not the circuit court system. That has everything online. If somebody has a court hearing pending, you're going to be able to just go online and find that out. But I will call the municipal court and find out, how to readily access their court calendar, because I would go to that woman's hearing to see what they're going to do to her or about her. But if she doesn't plead not guilty, even if what she's charged with is a misdemeanor, it will not be, she won't get, a lawyer. She'll just be found guilty and
Yeah, I think the
potentially used
person.
against her in the future.
Yeah, well, the person I was talking to was saying that they thought she had court like on the 4th, and I thought that was pretty quick turnaround. But I don't know what this usually for how they usually
Usually
do
when
it.
you're held in jail, you have a, turnaround, but it's also that used to have to do with bail, but I don't know as much about that system anymore that I used to. So, but to hold somebody in jail for 4 or 5 days, without giving them a right to go OR seems to be a bit unfair to me. Out on their own recognizance, not have to pay bail.
Right, and they switched the bail from like 12,000 to 5,000. So, and this is all just what this person told me, and they told me, you know, that you can pay 10% of it, and that'll get the person out, and just that's just stuff that you got to go through the
Who
handbook
this
to find out.
homeless has? Who in the hell who's homeless has friends who's gonna, pay, 10% at $5,000? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
so that's what I was saying. Like,
unrealistic.
what's yeah. So I mean,
There,
yeah. Anyway,
bail is intended to not punish you. The purpose of bail is so you'll come back to your hearings. Um, and I remember long time ago, decades ago, there was a judge in New York City who had, all these other judges had these higher bail amounts, and he would say, okay, $10, $15, and so they actually, he got a lot of attention for that. And he said, well, $20 or whatever it is, the same thing as two or three, 20,000, depending on your economic status. Right. So this is about making sure somebody comes back to court. It's not to do punishment, pre-conviction punishment. And unfortunately, now we ignore the fact, and have for decades, that it's often used as pre-conviction punishment.
That's also what debt has historically been.
Yeah.
Even like even the origins of debt several thousand years ago, like Mesopotamia, certain societies, punishment, like physical punishment and debt, were basically interchangeable. One could opt for one or the other. Um, so it's always a fine is uh, always a kind of physical punishment, and being kept in a cell certainly is.
Well, what I saw of that incident, the cop could have, I think Max and I talked about it. In my opinion, the cop could have given her 30 minutes and just walked away, go stand and bullshit or, chase somebody else off. Didn't really need to escalate that, and I didn't see anything but that, but just on that take, it would have been just as easy. She could have pulled all that stuff down. And maybe one of the things the community could do, if people are, I also talk with Max, is that people have time, and these happen usually 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning during Monday through Friday. And there's probably a specific date there used to be, and I will check that out, and go and just watch, the more the merrier. Take your video cameras. And that's really one of the things that can stop abuse, because it does, it's easier to, fix it when it's exposed, and it's exposed over and over. So a one-off is often, more, oh, well, that won't ever happen again. That was just a big mistake, blah, blah, blah. But my experience is it isn't necessarily, that isn't really true. If a cop, and if somebody will do that in front of a witness, who's filming them, there's some sense of, I'm doing nothing wrong here, and that may be an attitude problem. But I do think, and Dane mentioned, the cops are out there doing their job, and it's a tough job for them to, be um, in this position. So it's really our city councilors who need to be replaced. The mayor needs to be replaced. That staff needs to be replaced, but also just the kind of stuff that People's Homeless Commission is working on. If that kind of stuff can be implemented, that can change public policy without those other things, removing the people in power. Even with the recommendations we will probably end up having, it doesn't mean that it won't be an election battle, but it's possible it won't.
Well, and I kind of think about that, like how could the pressure actually get the right outcome? Because suing the city or whatever to get them to start a thing, like say they do something like Hastings Village or whatever, and they do the bare minimum. They're like, well, that didn't work. I guess the private is the only way to solve this anyway. Because if they do something, if they bought that right away trucking stop or whatever, and it failed miserably because we didn't even have plumbing or the stupid shit that happens, or they don't have a real plan. They don't have a vision for what they're even going to do. So of course everybody's going to come and say, no, you shouldn't do this. This is going to bring crime to our neighborhood. They're all scared about it because what the hell? We don't know what the city's going to do. What they're doing now is insane already. Like, why should we let them get a facility to try to escalate this even more, into some disgusting institution that's just going to get a bunch more bad press and everything, and have people trying to avoid it, like the mission basically. So that's what I'm saying is like that's what we need to do as the People's Home Commission, is show the vision for actually what needs to be done in more of an
Yes.
authoritative way where they can't really deny it in public, on the public record and everything. Because from my understanding, anybody who's tried to do anything has been met with no, sorry, we can't, we're not doing that. And like I talked to Ann at the St. Joe's feed, and she was like, well, the only thing that really works is you do it outside of the city limits, You kind of have to have a private property, and that's
Well, that's not feasible because people have no transportation. Our public transportation
right.
sucks. A lot of people have no, regular income. It has to be in a place where they can access food and, whatever they need on their own, because most of them are left to doing that, particularly when it comes to follow through with the things they have to do to get secure food, get an income, get housing, mental health services or addiction services, whatever they might need. So, from an advocate's point of view, I'm not supportive of anything that doesn't, make that readily available for the people,
Yeah.
and makes it worse than where they are right now. The one advantage of Deer Creek Park is it actually is centrally located in the city, and people can access those, and it doesn't even make it easy then, but it would be better. And so, warehousing people like you would in a concentration camp. And that's really, the problem that I see with Deer Creek as it is now, is it is operated much like it's a concentration camp without walls. And I don't care if that offends people, because I'm offended by the mere fact that we continue to allow people to live that way and then be harassed by the police in addition to, living there. And they really are, I think I mentioned this before, concentrating people by, basically saying, go here, and then the cops can control it. So you're less likely to be as harassed as you might be if you're living scattered outside. Uh, so, what will happen with something like the People's Homeless Commission is advocating for things that work and not really challenging what the police are doing. The purpose of the People's Homeless Commission was to invite even people who hate homeless people, as long as they're willing to listen, right? I mean, we can't, it won't work as a citizens assembly if it's just, the advocates that are there. And since we had people at the last one show up that were not, the traditional advocate side. It looks like we might be able to pull that off this Monday. Tomorrow it's going to be at the point, the point of the point. There's going to be food at 5:30, and the people from Zach's neck of the woods at the community supportive shelter are going to be down here, a couple of them, to talk with us about what they have been doing, what they've done since the Occupy movement.
Okay,
That's cool.
They need you.
I'll be in a minute.
Yeah, no, so that's what I keep going back to, like with the People's Homes Commission. It's here to inform people because people are misinformed and kind of help raise the dialogue and keep it on track with reality, I guess.
More
Well,
than
what you're
happy.
saying is reality. It's just a practical, thing. If you're going to make it a people's assembly, you can't say all the rednecks go go away. I've actually been in coalitions that worked with rednecks, so I'm certainly willing to give it a try.
Yeah, beyond advocacy, most importantly, the People's Homeless Commission, any kind of popular assembly, has to be understood as a political body, right? It's where decisions can be made. It's where people can have political agency. It's an organization that can organize efforts of direct action in the community in various levels. Even if that's something like mobilizing people to show up to a sweep so that it's not just, 2, 3 people, advocates who show up, but a crowd. That's the kind of thing that can potentially stop cops in their tracks.
Yes, and here I think it can. I mean, I think our community is small enough that it can, and that's a very good point because, and the challenge, if you want to solve the problem, know what it is, right? And say, okay, so anybody who's in the People's Homeless Commission, come down and watch these sweeps, right?
Yeah.
Because that'll inform you not just your assumptions of what goes down. And oddly enough, we may find that how the cops and the cleanup crew act changes dramatically just by the fact that there's more than a few people in the community watching them. And the interesting thing that happened at the other one, that I'm not quite sure about, and Max was not either, is John Hanlon showed up. And now Hanlon does have the work crew, right? It's under the county, and the city does contract with a work crew from the county. But I've never seen Hanlon at a sweep before, and he doesn't have jurisdiction as a sheriff, right, over any criminal matter, because that would be the Roseburg Police Department. So, not quite sure why that happened, other than because of the work crew.
Mm, yes. I think also to keep in mind with regard to direct action, key principle of direct action, which is already something that's been being practiced by certain organizations in Roseburg, but for those who are listening who aren't familiar with the term, direct action is effectively taking action in your community as a group, most importantly, and you can do direct action individually, but importantly, in organization with other people, with your neighbors, with coworkers, with people who live alongside you, whatever. Direct action is acting kind of as though government doesn't exist. Like, it has to assume that something like the city council, like the city of Roseburg, the whole governmental structure, the administrative structure doesn't exist. In that case, what does a community do to take care of the people in the city itself? Food Not Bombs is a clear example of this. Food
Yeah,
Not
I agree.
Bombs. Food Not Bombs has to be understood as a direct action group. That's like its foundational principle. People need to be fed. The existing state apparatus does not feed people or does not feed people adequately. So people have to come together and take care of the community because clearly the government as we would like to think it should operate, doesn't exist. And to the extent that the government does exist, it only gets in the way. That can certainly be seen in many parts of the country. I know cases in like Texas and Oklahoma of Food Not Bombs chapters being arrested by police for trying to serve food to homeless people. It's because those kinds of efforts, direct action efforts, also humiliate the governments. That's a key
True.
function of them, of shaming them, of humiliating them, of embarrassing them in public because they are proving themselves by your demonstration of your direct action to be incompetent, to be impotent, to be effectively illegitimate. And the only thing that they have left is the only thing that they're founded on, which is violence carried out by the police. And that's also where the camera serves a good function, because then you can capture that, you can show that, you can demonstrate that, but it also has to be explained to people.
Good point. Yeah.
Because
And
that is something
I
that
think
most
that's
don't
where you
understand.
came from. That's why I think your video, there ended up being a lot of explaining, right? And people questioning what was going on. So that's a very good point. Well, I think we're the last three in the room. And we've been here for 2 hours. Every time I say, think we don't have a topic to discuss, I think, okay, we'll be done in an hour. Apparently that's not true. So, all
Well,
righty.
thanks for letting
But
me hog the rest of the show, with my fucking,
oh, I don't care.
But
It's
yeah,
fine with
that's just
me.
one of the things it is on the collective mind a little bit, so I
Mhm.
appreciate